today, but, not because I believe that I'm young and hopeless. Not that I believe that I'm lost. Not that I believe that I'm going nowhere fast. It's that everybody else does. And I got to thinking about that. And, I don't want to say mean things about my family because it's my family. I think they probably had higher hopes for me, and I didn't live up to them because, I'm me. But I think when I was younger and I did believe that I was hopeless, and I did believe that I was lost, and I did believe I was going nowhere fast, I think that part of the reason I did believe that was because I was taught that. And so how much of my hopelessness was legit coming from myself, and how much of it was taught to me. My dad's favorite word for me when I was 15 years old was unacceptable. It seemed like every other day that's what he was saying to and about me. Unacceptable, Beck. Unacceptable. And that's and I internalized it. I don't think that that's what he realized that he was doing, and probably if he ever even hears this show, I'll be surprised. But I don't think that he intended for me to take it the way that I did. He wanted me to straighten up and do good things with my life, and I get that. But there's that saying that the road to hell is paved with good intentions. And but I thought of myself as unacceptable. And so I think we learn to be hopeless. But the flip side to this, going back to the learned helplessness, and the good side of those dogs, was that it can be unlearned. And I don't know how much of that involves other people teaching us to be hopeful. I think, as opposed to somebody physically having to teach you that you're not helpless, like those scientists had to do with the dogs. I think it's a much more personal transformation that has to take place. And, and as I'm saying this, I'm pausing because I'm trying to think, how did I unlearn my hopelessness? And I honestly can't tell you how I necessarily unlearned it. It wasn't, and I don't even think I've completely unlearned it, but because part of having, problems with depression and so on is it's hard to see outside of that, and it's hard to hold on to hope, because when you're in the midst of the depression, it's Sometimes it's hard to see to the next day. Sometimes it's hard to see to the next minute, you know? And I still feel hopeless sometimes. Like, you know, that's the whole reason actually that I started this podcast back in late December or early January. I had just come through the worst of the depression that followed after my son was not taken away. I voluntarily sent him to my parents' house, but it doesn't feel voluntary. And I realized that part of what got me through that was doing my Lit Nerd podcast. And I said, well, you know, I should do another podcast and share these experiences and talk about it, because maybe that'll help me. And it has. It did, and it has. And maybe maybe that's the key to unlearning hopelessness, is to acknowledge it and talk about it. I think I heard this on John Tesh, actually, so take what you will from it, but apparently there was a study done that said people who talk out loud to themselves are actually better at problem solving than people who don't. So even though it makes you look like a crazy person, you're not. You're processing things better. Now, I mean, there's a huge difference between, you know, talking to yourself about like your grocery list and, you know, talking to yourself about how the government is controlling your brain through satellites, you know. Not to make light of mental illness, but there you are. There's obviously, we're not talking about like crazy voices in my head talking. It's, you know, sort of talking yourself through problem solving out loud. And apparently people who talk out loud when they're problem solving are more efficient and effective at problem solving than the people who don't. And so maybe that's the key to unlearning hopelessness, is talk about it out loud, which probably is making Freud very happy wherever the hell he is. The inventor of talk therapy. Well, actually, I don't think he invented it, but he like popularized it. But yeah, I talked about this briefly last month on the Lit Nerd podcast about freedom through speech, and there's great liberation in saying things out loud. And so I guess my way is, I'm not necessarily saying like, yes, start a podcast, you know, when you're sad, start podcasting, because that's what's going to make everything better. Maybe it will, maybe it won't. If that's what you want to do, go for it. If you don't want to do that, you don't have to. But, you know, reach out, talk to somebody. And so I guess ultimately the difference between learned hopelessness and learned helplessness is unlearned with the assistance of another person, as opposed to hopelessness is unlearned when you take that initiative and say, I'm not going to be hopeless anymore. And yes, it involves other people, but, you know, those other people don't necessarily have to be a huge crowd. I'm sitting here personally right now, I'm talking to my dining room table chairs. I'm looking around. It's really weird for me now. Side note, if you've been listening to this show, and especially if you've been listening to the Lit Nerd podcast, you know, in the place where I used to live, Thistledew, I used to sit at the kitchen table, which, I mean, it's the same table. It's weird for me to think of it as a dining room because there was tile, and to me, tile goes in the kitchen and carpeting in the dining room. And anyways, and I sit at the kitchen table and in front of my air conditioner, and so I would talk to my air conditioner during my podcasts. That's who I did my podcast for, was my air conditioner. I don't have that anymore. I don't have something specifically to look at. And so I'm floundering here. I don't know. I will figure something out. I'm telling you. I don't know. I may have to do something borderline creepy and print out or blow up a picture of a certain someone and put it in the middle of the table, and I'll do the podcast to him. So I don't know. Anyways, but yeah, I guess it's a good news, bad news situation with hopelessness, is that, you know, bad news, it's hopelessness. Good news, it's learned. Bad news, other people taught you this, but good news, you can teach yourself. Or you can unteach yourself, I guess you can say. And bad news is it's all up to you. The good news is it's all up to you. And it's not easy. I never want to pretend like anything in this life is easy, especially when we're talking about changing your thoughts and changing your mind and your perspective. That's never easy. I just recently read this book called You Are a Badass, and I've been talking for a long time, longer than I meant to, but anyways. But I just read this book called You Are a Badass, and by Jen Sincero. And in that, she calls the ego what Freud would have called the ego. But it's really like the self that sort of regulates between, you know, essentially the higher morality and ethical side of yourself, and then your inner toddler that wants it now. And so the ego sort of regulates between those. But Jen Sincero, she talks about how it's really the ego just wants to maintain what is easy and what is normal and what it knows. And so she calls it the big snooze, because it wants to keep you asleep to the possibilities of life and the way things can change. But because it's really hard to write out big snooze over and over and over again, she called it BS, and I went, yes, that's exact. So I way went over time here. My alarm just went off, and I went, oh shit, this is a long show. But I do not feel like starting over again. I feel like I have said everything that needs to be said. So I apologize for this going over, and I'll end it here. So this is all I'm going to say about that. If you would like to contact me on social media, the username to look for is PurpleBecca923. That's PurpleBecca 923. That is my username at Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and Snapchat. That is also my email address, PurpleBecca923 at gmail.com. And website still under construction because I can't get my brain to work properly. So I will not mention it. But until next time, remember, go out there, create what you deserve, believe that you deserve it.